Good afternoon. This is the spotlight session on comprehensive energy planning for sustainable development and net zero targets. This session is co-organized by the Asian Development Bank and the International Atomic Energy Agency. And to start, we will be having an opening and welcoming remarks from the Asian Development Bank by the Senior Director of Energy Sector, Mr. Priyanta Wijayatunga.
Can see a standing instruction. Hi, presenter, you can use this clicker to slides your presentation. Good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to this session on energy planning, and hope you have been having a good time since we started our sessions on Monday. And this is also one of those very important deep dive sessions we have. Once again, warmest greetings to all of you. Thank you for attending this spotlight session on comprehensive energy planning for sustainable development and net zero targets. Can you think of anything which doesn't change? It is only change which doesn't change. By the way, I'm a Buddhist, so this is the principle on which the whole Buddhism is built on. It's only change which changes. Nothing else. Everything else changes. We ourselves change and we live amid changes. Climate change impacts, changing technologies, changing policies and commitments, whether it's deliberate or not, or whether it's because of different times that we come across, or maybe because of political and other changes, you change policies and commitments. Changing needs. To cope with the perpetual changes, we need to plan, because otherwise we'll get into trouble, because you have to plan. Of course, it does not mean you have a perfect plan based on a determinant plan. You may have to have a probabilistic planning. You may have to have different scenario planning. You have to have a plan. If this happens, what we are going to do. And so therefore, we need to have a system to plan. It cannot just come out off the shelf, or it doesn't come out from air. You need to have a system to plan. As countries strive to realize their sustainable development goals, nationally determined contributions, and net zero targets, energy plays a critical role. I don't have to reiterate this. Energy system analysis and planning must evolve to consider these multidimensional factors. Many years ago, we may have planned only looking at economic costs and minimum economic costs. Now then, we started looking at environmental costs. Now you have to look at environmental costs plus climate challenge, and many other things come as we move. And therefore, we have to, the planning itself should evolve as we move on. With all the ongoing and necessary changes, comprehensive energy planning enables the systematic analysis of factors to find optimal solutions in achieving energy, socio-economic, and climate goals. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, in short we call it, promotes the use of several technology-neutral modeling tools. ADB, in partnership with IAEA, aims to build the capacities of our developing member countries, or our DMCs, to do comprehensive energy planning. Interestingly, with, of course, all the reforms, governance reforms, restructuring in the energy sector, which we have been preaching for many years coming in, we kind of abandoned integrated energy planning. Now we are coming back, because without it, you can't do anything. And particularly when it comes to addressing the climate challenge. Our ADB energy policy support enabling our DMCs to fully understand how the energy sector should change as they strive to achieve their sustainable development goals, nationally determined contributions, and net zero targets. This spotlight session gives an overview of comprehensive energy planning and the study results ADB conducted in selected developing member countries and the cities. Energy planning is among ADB's efforts to help address complex development challenges and deliver comprehensive development impacts. All these for the vision for a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific. For today, let's all make this an interactive and meaningful session with everyone's sharing of knowledge, insights, and experiences. Hope you'll enjoy this session and take something away back to your own places to see what can be implemented. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Now we will have the welcome and opening remarks from our co-organizer, International Atomic Energy Agency, from the section head of Planning and Economic Studies. Let's all welcome Mr. Henri Paere.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to be opening this spotlight session, and thank you, Dr. Priyanka, Dr. Nam, and ADB for organizing this spotlight event. The world is not on track to meet its sustainable development goals by 2030, nor the goals for the Paris agreements, and the reasons are multiple. Transitions are difficult, challenging. The pace of technological changes is impressive, but decision-making is much slower. And we need energy planning to inform decision makers as well as investors. More than ever, countries need to plan their future pathways and assess all the possible options to inform decision makers, but also investors and financial institutions. One of the subtitles of this forum is Time for Urgent Action Now. And it is also urgent now for countries to seriously consider energy planning to meet their sustainable development goals and their net zero targets. So it's very timely that this spotlight event is being organized here in ASEF, and IAEA and ADB are partners in this effort, and we look forward to continue a fruitful collaboration, and hopefully this is one of the first events that we will be reporting on the outcomes of collaborating on energy planning. So I'm looking forward to a very fruitful, informative session this afternoon, and I thank you all, and please stay and listen to the other speakers. They will be providing very good information about the work that's been done in this topic. Thank you. I will actually stay here because I will give a scene setter presentation. Thank you. On this session. So let me go to the first slide that I have. Just wanted to re-emphasize that energy transitions that countries need to go through will be very complex, will require comprehensive energy planning to support evidence-based decision-making. This is really important, evidence-based decision-making. All low-carbon technologies will be needed. This is really our feeling, including, of course, renewables, fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage, investments in grids, energy storage, and for some countries, nuclear power. I would really like to stress the importance of, or the urgency of tackling these transitions and addressing energy planning as a way to update nationally determined contributions, long-term strategies that more than ever need to be aligned with the SDG goals and the Paris goals. So, no. Oh, this is not working. I'm supposed to go to the second slide. Perhaps I have to. Not doing anything here. Can we have the bigger screen? Yes, okay. All right. So a few words on the current landscape and challenges. So this is for the Asia region. In 2023, 4.7 billion inhabitants. That's about 60% of the world population and growing. Electricity demand has been rising by about 3% annually and is expected to continue this trend. There's a heavy dependency on natural gas imports, accounting for about 65% of global LNG imports. If current trends continue, we expect oil and gas to remain also a very important part, about 60% of total energy supply to 2050, and that coal that's used in power generation could still remain a very important part of total energy consumption. So achieving net zero targets in the region will require significant investments in the low carbon and renewable energies, energy efficiency and technical innovations. And transitioning away from this dependence on fossil fuels is a particular challenge for the region, together with balancing energy adequacy, affordability, and sustainability. I also want to point out that countries in the region, in South Asia and Southeast Asia, are among the regions that are the most vulnerable to extreme weather events, according to the IPCC. So this is also another challenge that has to be taken into account as countries plan their energy transition. So what is the role of energy planning and integrated energy system assessment to support decision making? What is needed? We need careful assessment of all possible options, all technologies, the benefits of these technologies, how they complement each other and integrate within future low carbon energy systems. What are the grid developments and the interconnections that are needed? Also, climate, land, water, and energy challenges are becoming extremely linked, increasingly linked. So this nexus needs to be accounted for when when planning and building climate resilient energy systems. We know, for example, that there's a competition between power generation and food in terms of land use. So that's a very important parameter to be taken into account when planning future energy pathways. The IAEA capacity building program for energy planning is an activity that we've been doing for several decades. It supports the decision and policy making in member states by strengthening national capabilities in energy system analysis so that the countries can take ownership and develop their own energy strategies. So national expertise is essential. You have on this slide a couple of publications from the IAEA, including the second from the left, the IAEA Toolkit for Sustainable Energy Planning, which is a new report that we have just released in the context of the G20, and you will have the link when you have the presentations. So I want to emphasize that our capacity building program is driven by the needs of our member states. We implement it through some specific channel, which is our technical cooperation program. And we're responsible for, in my section, implementing these energy planning activities. Let me just go to the next slide to give you the three main pillars of our capacity building program. It relies on the development and the distribution of analytical tools together with training and support. These analytical tools will be described in the next slide. We provide technical assistance for energy analysis to our member states, and technical assistance on data and information collection. So we have a suite of energy planning tools that we provide to over 150 countries, 21 regional and international organizations. These are technology neutral tools, methodologies, and we provide the training for users and future users of these tools that can be applied at the regional, national, or local level. These tools are developed through agencies' efforts in partnerships with other organizations and are delivered cost-free. So you just need to contact the agency and we will provide those tools. We have two very important tools among this suite. MAED, which is to analyze energy demand. It's based on socioeconomic parameters describing all economic sectors, including transport and household, and estimates and projects future final and useful energy demand by fuels and end users in each sector. And then the energy supply model message, which will be presented later by my colleague, addresses the evolution of the energy system based on techno-economic parameters and system user constraints like carbon constraints. It optimizes the energy system mix. It's a mixed linear optimization model that helps users to assess different development pathways aiming to address some targets such as clean energy transition, energy security, system resilience. And in addition to MAED and message, we have tools for supporting financial assessment, FinPlan, for assessing the macroeconomic impacts of investments, Empower, for assessing the externalities due to environmental impacts from the use of fossil fuels or nuclear-based generation. And also we have methodologies that support countries that want to assess the nexus between climate, land, energy, and water. That's the CLUE methodology, as well as strategic environmental assessment, SEA. So on this slide, I give you some examples of our ongoing capacity building projects in energy planning. We have regional projects for the European region. We have projects in Latin America and in the Caribbean region. We're supporting a very important project in Africa called the Continental Master Plan. That's managed by the African Union Development Agency and 5 African power pools. And we collaborate with IRENA as modeling partners. There are 2 modeling partners, IAEA and IRENA, in this project. And then we have national projects. But here we're to talk about also our collaborations with ADB. And in 2023, the IAEA delivered trainings on comprehensive supply assessment using the message tool for countries in East Asia and Pacific. So we had a first workshop in Jakarta last year, then one in Tashkent later in 2023. And a few weeks ago, we held a workshop for the South Asia region in Dhaka. And we're planning more in the future. So just a few words to finish. We need really sustained national capacity for energy planning. Partners are crucial. Partners that can be organizations like IRENA, International Energy Agency, UN organizations with which we partner, but also academia. We work with the Compatible Growth Program, national labs, and also institutions like ADB. What is very important and what I would like to emphasize is that for us, building and enhancing local expertise is fundamental so that countries can independently analyze and elaborate their own energy pathways and strategies without relying extensively on external consultants. So we know that local conditions are unique. it is therefore very important to have local capacity to develop, run, analyze, and interpret model results. And without that capacity, national development strategies may be ill-informed and may have unwanted consequences. So really to stress the importance of building local expertise and having countries take ownership of the energy planning models and methodologies. So I'll just finish by listing some of the benefits of integrated energy system planning, well, assessing different pathways, considering different options, and informing policy making and financing the decisions, assess options to move away from high dependence on unabated fossil fuel. Also, very importantly, to assess the macroeconomic benefits, including the impacts on the economy, on jobs, and just to be sure that no one is left behind. This is the concept of just transition, and this is very important when countries are considering moving away from fossil plants, so that local community that have jobs in say coal-fired power plants can also get jobs in the new greener economy. Importance of collaborations and partnerships. We can't do it alone. We need to do it together with our partners. And we're very, very happy to be partnering with ADB in energy planning. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Henri, for setting the scene for our session. Now we move on to a presentation on IAEA's message tool for sustainable energy supply development assessment. We'll be hearing again from International Atomic Energy Agency. Let's all welcome 3E analyst, Yunshu Lee.
Hi, good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for having me here. Thanks to ADB for inviting us to speak at this event. So today I will be talking about one of the in-house tools that we have developed at the IAEA. It's called Message, which some of you might be familiar with. So we will discuss how Message works, what it has been used for within the agency, and what you might also be able to consider using it for. So for my first slide, I would like to talk about the different themes that energy planners often think about when they think about energy planning. So developing a cost-effective and sustainable energy system requires holistic planning. Holistic means that we will consider not just the costs of the technologies, but also the environmental impact and also other constraints like societal or land use constraints. So in many parts of the world right now, as my colleague and many other colleagues have mentioned, there has been increasing energy demand because of robust economic activities and developments. We are also seeing trends in urbanization. We see that there are a lot of new technologies that are coming, upcoming, and older technologies. We see their technical parameters improving. And of course, we focus now also a lot on climate goals. So there can be carbon constraints, carbon policies, and initiatives in order to mitigate the impact of climate change. Energy planners also, of course, look at energy access issues, how we provide energy to communities which does not yet have access. So then what are the main questions that are to be answered by holistic energy planning? One of the most important questions that we often see is, what is the optimal energy mix? What does optimal even mean? Optimal can be in the cost sense, it can be in the least it can be in the least cost sense, or it can be in the sense where you have lowered carbon emissions. So what is this mix that is required for meeting current demand as well as future demand? How to quantify the costs of the energy transition, the cost of both generation, of transmission systems, of storage, of integrating different technologies into the grid, and what policies are needed to reach emission and sustainability goals. And of course, how does trade and energy storage feature in the energy system? So before I jump into the Message tool, I will describe how we represent the energy system in our tool. So when we look at elements in the energy system, here I broadly divide it into 3 different aspects, but I know some modelists, you can go even further or you can represent it in different ways. So we look at energy sources and resources. This includes things like coal, oil, gas, and also natural resources like solar, wind, hydropower. We look at energy carriers. So these are what you can derive from the energy sources like electricity, heat, gasoline, hydrogen. And then in order to manipulate these energy carriers and energy forms, we have different types of technologies. So we have technologies to do with the extraction of resources, the conversion of one energy form to another, like the converting wind kinetic energy into electricity. And we also have storage of energy, the transmission and distribution of these types of energy, either through your electricity grid or through your gas pipelines. And of course, end-use technologies. So these are the technologies where you will, which will deliver to you useful services. Like, for example, you see a car delivering useful services. You see electrical appliances, data centers, and also the heating system in your homes. So we can represent an energy system using a tool that we call MESSAGE. MESSAGE stands for Model for Energy Supply System Alternatives and their General Environmental Impacts. So it is a tool that is used to design optimization models in order to study the capacity expansion of technologies, in order to assess the related investments with technologies, in order to analyze the environmental impacts, and also to be used in formulating policies. It is applicable at the national, sub-regional, or the regional level. As Henry has earlier mentioned, we have several projects in all these levels. Maybe I will also explain how it looks. So now companies talk about software as a service. So we have a software here, which has been developed for many years ago. And this is an interface which you see on the screen. So you don't need to know coding or scripting. You just need to know how to enter what you find to be important of an energy system into our software. And our software will be able to do the data organization, the data processing, the optimization steps, as well as it also has an interface which allows you to see some results and export these results. So it makes it very easy for energy modelers. You don't have to touch the code if you don't want to. So the key characteristics of this MESSAGE tool, as opposed to just modeling power systems, it can be used to model the entire energy system, including heat, etc. It can provide you with a medium to long-term outlook of the energy system. This is not to say that we only model years. We model at we can model at hourly granularity. So we can model both the dispatch as well as the capacity expansion of a system. So for a power plant that produces at hourly granularity, you'll be able to get the associated costs at each hour. For storage as well, you will be able to retrieve the level of storage at each hour. And this is especially important right now because we have a lot of renewables, and renewables, as we know, they are subject to weather conditions and fluctuations. So to be able to model at hourly granularity is pretty important to quantify the impact of renewables on your energy system. It is also a bottom-up approach. So as opposed to top-down approaches, we are able to model power units or energy technologies at the unit level. So we can study the microeconomic behavior of these types of technologies and use the aggregation of these microeconomic results to look at how things would look in a macro level from now until 2050 or beyond. It is different from CGE models, econometric models, or input-output models. It is also a dynamic tool, because with this model, with this tool, we can have continuity between the different modeling periods. So we are not just taking a snapshot in time of, say, 2030 or 2050. In fact, we are joining the years, the periods from one period to another. So what is happening in 2030 will depend on what is happening in the years before. It also runs on an optimization algorithm. So this means that it's capable of mathematically finding the lowest cost point, or the lowest the point of lowest carbon emissions, depending on what your objective function is. So this is different from a simulation or accounting framework where you might come up with a result, but you may not be sure that that is indeed the least cost solution. So here I give a very a simple diagram of how it would look like in message, how the different parts of the system are represented in message. First, you have the primary energy, such as oil, gas, coal, getting extracted or imported from your neighboring countries, or other countries which are not even neighboring. And then this type of primary energy gets converted through refinery or power plant into secondary levels of energy, like electricity, diesel, etc. And then it gets transported by your transmission and distribution network of electricity or your pipelines. Finally, it reaches the consumer, which can then employ this energy for useful activities. So the key parameters which are important to be considered for each for this tool are things like costs and learning rates, the cost of the technologies, of the distribution network, of generation of investment, as well as the learning rate of these technologies. Also, what we would often have to consider are technology performance parameters like efficiencies, availabilities, ramp rates, for example. And certainly what is one of the most important elements is what is actually the demand that you will have to meet in your system. And of course, also resource availability of your natural resources, and whether you are going to trade with other locations, because a system where you do have trade can give you a lower system cost as compared to a system where different regions have to produce their energy completely domestically. So for these parameters, the data is really important. We get these data from open sources, from other international organizations, from research institutes, from private data providers. Okay, so this is a more complex version of what I had shown earlier, where the boxes represent the technologies and then the lines represent the different levels of the energy, finally reaching final demand. And having assembled your energy system, now the question is, what do you want to do with it? What kind of objective do you want to see? So we run a optimization behind this system with all the constraints that we have input into the system, like your ramp rates and your land use factor, the amount of resources which are available. We generate a matrix which can be put into a solver. So the solvers that we use are things like Gurobi or C++, GLPK, if you're familiar with such terms. And this solver does an algorithm to give us the minimal discounted system cost. The system cost here includes all the costs of the system, not just generation or investment costs. And for this, we use linear programming techniques. If we want to have discrete units, then we also switch on the mixed integer programming part of it. So I have spoken about the different elements of the message tool. Now I'm going to talk about what it can do. So it can model diverse energy supply systems. It doesn't have to be an energy system of a whole region. You can also use it to focus on particular aspects of your energy system. You can just model a generation plant. You can model renewable technologies of hydro, wind, and solar. Your interest may be in the environmental regulations and their impact on your energy outlook. You may be interested in nuclear power and fuel cycle in particular, etc. So we know that electricity demand. So on the left side here is a graph of electricity demand that can vary every day as well as throughout the year seasonally. We also know that the production capability of natural resources like wind and solar can also vary quite a lot from 1 hour to the next. So how can we come up with a system where you can accommodate the variability in both? And with that, we can use MESSAGE to assemble a model. We can also use MESSAGE to model hydropower plants. Here you see a cascading hydropower plant where you have two different storage systems, and they have different power plants associated with each. They can have different heads, so we can model cascading hydropower. We can also model end-use energy technologies by characterizing the amount of energy that would be produced from each of these technologies by quantifying also the demand for each of these types of technologies. We can model the whole electricity system by connecting power plants, by connecting energy generation to the grid, and from the grid deliver these type of energies to industry, to domestic, etc. And of course, we can also model environmental regulations and climate policies. So for example, in Asia, we are looking at a lot of low carbon technological solutions. We are looking at emission targets. We are looking at carbon pricing and even and carbon credit trading schemes. So this can all be modeled in MESSAGE by, for example, setting upper emission limits to GHG, giving them a price, so we can model carbon price. We can also account for the amount of emissions that are associated with your energy system. So this will help you achieve your, help you consider what kind of future you would need to, what kind of future steps you need to take in order to reach your net zero targets and achieve your net zero transition. In addition to power, we can model non-power applications. So if you recall earlier, we talked about having energy carriers. So these energy carriers do not have to be electricity. We can also have heat, we can have water. So here we have two examples of things we can model: a multi-stage flash distillation and also reverse osmosis process. And as mentioned earlier, we can model the international trade of electricity. If you have two different locations, we can endogenously model how the electricity prices may evolve, how the trading prices may in the two countries, and how the trade would look like endogenously. So within the IAEA, as Henri has mentioned earlier, we have assisted member countries in coming up with their country and regional studies. So in Africa, for example, we had helped the Kingdom of Eswatini to develop their energy master plan, where they did use the MESSAGE tool. We had also it has also been used in the Rwanda for Rwanda as well as for Botswana. In Latin America, we have in Latin America, this model has also been used in Paraguay. It has been used in Guatemala as well as Colombia. And Henri has already mentioned this slide, so I will skip over it. So yes, so one of the main things that we are working on right now is using MESSAGE, working as a modeling partner for the Africa Continental Master Plan. So the aim of the Continental Master Plan is to identify priority projects based on it, what kind of projects they should be, what size they should be, where they should be located, and in which year should they be considered to build. It's also aimed at unlocking the cross-border trade of inter-power pool trade. So 5 of the power pools are all involved. It is led by AutoNEPAD and is supported by partners like the IAEA, IRENA, and also EU experts from the UTAF team. Yeah. So I hope that I have given you a clear idea of how message works, and how we have been using it in our activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Yunshu, for the overview of what message can do. Now we proceed to the results of the studies ADB conducted at the national and city level. And to present these studies, we will be having from the Celestial Earth Executive Director, Anindya Bhattacharya, and also from PricewaterhouseCoopers Manager, Garima Vats.
Okay, so thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And it's a great pleasure that we are here. And thanks, ADB, for inviting us to present these results of this study. Before I get into the results, what we are going to show today, we'd just like to highlight that this study we have been conducting for a couple of years now. And we implemented this, what you have already heard, the message model. So we have used this model, and what you will be looking at now is the results, how that model gets implemented in the, that model is a little bit different what we have used, but the basic fundamental is same. We call it a message IX. This is another version of this model, but the fundamentally this model are all same. So I'll directly go to the presentation. So we are implementing this project under the TA program 9690. So under that, we are in the sub-project 1, you can see the energy systems analysis technology roadmaps and feasibility studies for pilot testing. Is pretty big name, but this is what we are actually covering here. Now, you can see that we have done these countries, we have covered these countries like India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, China, and Vietnam. And also there are 3 cities where we intend to implement, to do this work as well. But today, we are going to showcase the results from Bangladesh and Pakistan, and also 1 city, Denpasar, because as you can understand that there is a time limitation, we can't go through all of them. Now, let me first start with the background and objective of this study, why we wanted to do this. As my colleagues from IAEA, they have already identified that what is the purpose of this and how these modeling can help the countries to develop their long-term strategies, be it low carbon, be it net zero. But I just wanted to highlight that when we started this work, that time net zero was still not into the discussion. We started this work officially in 2019. So just before the COVID. That time net zero was not a discussion in the discussion. So, but later on net zero came into the whole debate. So that time we started with, of course, the indices was there, and also the SDG 7. So you can see that officially these words are still there in our whole assessment, but ultimately these are all leading towards the net zero for sure. So we wanted to, in summary, what we wanted to try is that how these countries, the developing countries in Asia, can move more towards renewable energy, more towards clean technology, and how they can transit from the conventional way of economic growth and prosperity to a more climate-friendly, environment-friendly, clean and green pathway. So that was more or less the idea of this work. And ultimately, we wanted to come up with a list of technologies which could be the priority technology for these countries, and also the corresponding investment, that how much money, because without money, you can't do anything. So more or less, this is the coverage of this work in summary. Now, I think that objective I have already talked about. Now, the modeling framework, I think you have already heard enough for the message, but I will still try to, say that this is a message IX. You can see that IX word has added here. So uh, I am not very sure whether the IAES message is still open source. I don't know. You can comment. But this message model was also developed by another international organization along with IAEA, that is the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, IASA. They are one of the largest and the most prominent research think tank globally. And they actually developed this idea of having this message IX, and this particular message IX is in GAMS code, and it is the core model framework is in the open source domain. So that's what we picked up this, so that if any country wants to use it, they can use it. At least the code can be used free of cost. The only problem is that this model, the solver that needs to be used for this one is the Cplex solver, and that is a commercial solver. But I think that is a different thing. Now, this is the kind of framework that we have used. This is the kind of framework that we have used that you can see. Okay, so these are the list of variables that has gone into it, like the objective function, extraction, renewable sources. All these things are in the variable list, and these are the parameters that has gone into the model. But I'm trying to see that this is the input where the main information is coming into the model, that is the energy demand. So that is the entry point of all the exogenous information into the model, and then it moves here. So this is the service demand that is coming from the economic activity. So we had to first estimate that how the country is going to consume energy by different forms, by different technology and different sector, depending on its economic growth and prosperity. So that is the one set of work that needs to be done outside the model first, and then it can be fed into the model as an energy demand, and then it flows inside. Then it calculates that how much the final energy requirement, what will be the primary energy, and then it goes back to the resource. So this is where this actually works. So it starts from the left side, like the useful energy demand. So this is basically the demand that is estimated in terms of what is the kind of country's requirement in terms of achieving certain economic activity. For example, the useful energy demand in our model here in the transport sector, I can tell one example, like the billion passenger kilometer. So this is 1 hour input into the model. It's termed as the BPKM, the billion passenger kilometer. So what does it mean? That if the country has to grow with certain economic prosperity of suppose 5% or 6% annual growth, then it has to have some kind of a transport services. Now, how to measure that services? It number of passengers that are traveling, and then multiplied by the number of vehicles, and then number of vehicles on an average, how much kilometer they are traveling in 1 year. So all these three factors multiplied, it comes up with the billion passenger kilometer. That is our input into the model. So it is not exactly the energy per se, but this is we call it a useful energy demand. Similarly, we have also put into the model the demand in terms of the, for the freight transport also. We said that how much ton of freight that has to be moved from one place to another, and by which type of vehicles. So these are the, I don't want to spend much of time because this is all already explained. So you can see that this is again about the same thing. There's a bottom-up energy model, and we start from the useful energy. So you can see that these are the things that is coming from our external assessment on the economic performance of the countries, like how much agricultural energy demands are required, how much transport demands are required, then residential building energy requirement, how much is that, and then commercial and industrial. So all these demands are coming here, and then how these demands are met. So whether this is, then we have a fuel-wise split of technology. Even in the transport sector, there could be oil-based transportation, it could be gas-based transportation, it could be electrical vehicles. So all these. So like this, the whole technology database has been prepared, and then the assessment is done. Now, this is the technological roadmap, technological mapping. So that there are certain technologies like the demand technologies are there, then the grid technologies, then we have import technology, utilities, generation technologies, and resource extraction. So these are all the class of technologies that has been used. And main purpose, as I told you, that we wanted to identify which are the technologies that are, coming up to be important in the future for in terms of achieving the low carbon pathway or net zero. Now, I think this is the scenario assumptions. Like we have two scenarios. One is the business as usual scenario where we have considered that okay, sorry. I think this one, the earlier one, nah? Yeah. Okay. I can't change the slides. Hmm. Okay. Yeah. So we created two scenario. One is the BAU scenario where we have considered that what is the countries. Our assumption is that whatever the country has already as adopted as a low carbon policy, so that will be part of that baseline scenario. And the low carbon is that what additionally the country can do in terms of achieving certain renewable energy targets or the NDC targets, whatever is there in their agenda. So these are the two scenarios, and now so how we have developed these. So I already explained to you, but I think this slide is there, so I think we can explain again that how the demand has been calculated. Now the data collection of the historical energy. So the mostly the information and data that has come into this study is the government source data, and we have collected from the different government sources by different sectors and the technology. Then we have analyzed of the historical energy used to arrive to the growth patterns. So we have also used outside the model technology, the kind of the econometric tool to estimate that what could be the growth projection of this country in terms of that particular technological growth. Then analysis of the sectoral policies to identify future growth prospects, shift in energy use patterns. So these are all coming from the different government policies that are already in place and the historic data. So we tried to go back, trace the information for last 10, 15 years to set the trend that how the technology of in that particular sector is going. Suppose, for example, that the electric vehicle, suppose if this is the technology that when you are building that into the model, we wanted to see that what type of, when these first electric vehicle got introduced in the country, whether if it is or if not. If it is already introduced, then what type of technology, what is their efficiency level at that point of time, and then how that has changed over the period of time, because we started, our base year is 2020. So till that time, so if anything that has happened before that, so we set that trend, and then we put that into a separate model to see that if these are the things are this is the historic trend of that demand of the technology based on certain macroeconomic factor, that how it is expected to grow in the future. Quite often, we also refer to the government published reports, which are already available in certain cases, like for Bangladesh. We got a couple of reports on their future technology pathway for power sector. So they are already, approved, kind of growth path that they have adopted under different scenarios until 2040. So we have used those kind of information which are already available. So our entire assessment is mostly based on the government information, be it in the form of an analysis, be it in the form of data. If not, then we have used our own method of doing these projections. Now, I just wanted to skip this. I will get to the result first. I think now we can directly come to the result, which will be more interesting to see. So first, let me present the Pakistan result. Like as per the first round of, so this is what the kind of where we started with, because what is there on the ground for that country. So what we see that there is a target of 20% emission. So there is already a target of 20% emissions reduction below BAU emissions by 2030. So the country is already having these targets. In 2021, Pakistan updated its NDC to target 50% emissions reduction. So these are all the information that has gone into the assessment, especially creating the new scenarios, what we called as a low carbon scenario. Then with the also high priority, we have that by 2030, the country aims for at least 30% of all new vehicles sold in Pakistan in various categories to be electric vehicles. So like this, we have got all the current existing information to see that how the country is already considered to become low carbon, or in the future, how they would like to go, which helps us to create the new scenario on top of the BAU. Now, what we found here is that once we apply all these low carbon, trajectories on the targets, that okay, this much percentage of electric vehicle, this much percentage of renewable. So how it looks like in terms. So our LC scenario for Pakistan, what we found that between a low carbon scenario and the BAU scenario, the final energy demand is going to be reduced by almost 50 million ton oil equivalent. And this circle shows that what is the composition by which sector, how much percentage reduction is expected. So it shows that around the industry in the country is expected to reduce final energy demand almost by 40%, 39%. Compared to BAU scenario by 2050. Similarly, that the biggest one, they can achieve around 41% reduction in the final energy is possible in the passenger transport segment. So like this, you see that by 2050, we found that the country can achieve reduction of 50 million ton oil equivalent of final energy reduction, which gets translated into around 494 million ton of CO2 equivalent emissions reduction. And these sectors who can contribute, the industry, definitely transport passenger segment, and also the industry. These are the main contributor in terms of emissions reduction. So if that pathway is followed, then the country can expect around almost 500 million ton equivalent of emissions reduction by 2050. Now, you see that what we see, what it translates, what it means for the country, like in terms of investments, we found that the country would need to invest around almost $600 billion between 2020 and 2050. Under BAU scenario, what is the current status? If that continues, that they will be spending almost $600 billion. But if they have to implement these additional, measures into the system, their additional cost is around $192 billion, which is roughly coming around $6.5 billion every year to support the decarbonization effort under the LC scenario. And this LC scenario is aligned with their existing and revised NDC targets. So that means in other way, we can say that if Pakistan has to implement its NDC, in its true form, that in its commitment form, then there is an additional expenditure that the country has to incur, which is closely around $6.5 billion. In terms of emissions, it is also the total emissions would reach around 327 million ton by 2030 and 882. So which is around 21% and 36% lower than the BAU scenario. So it is, so almost if it goes like, if they implement it successfully, around 36% reduction is possible. Similarly, that gets translated into energy consumption, like primary energy also, you can see that around 13% reduction by 2050. Import dependence continues, but in the composition changes. Basically, the country needs to be more on the gas, though Pakistan had some gas initially, but because of the extraction, they are losing the gas reserves of domestic reserves. So they need to get into more on gas if they want to continue with more with the economic growth of around 5%. And then the final energy, we expected that around 12% reduction is possible by 2050 and 7% in the earlier stage of 2030. By 2050, coal share to reduce from 41% under BAU to 23% in low carbon. So this is almost half. The coal can reduce to almost half. Electricity share to increase from 11% to 16%. So this is also important thing, that when we are moving more towards the low carbon pathway and higher efficiency, to achieve higher efficiency, shifting from the fossil fuel direct use to the electricity is the first step that needs to be done, because that is much more efficient way of getting the energy sector services. So you can see that 11% to 16% jump is happening. And off-grid electricity demand will also grow at a 15% CAGR between 2020 and 2050 against only 2%. So this is also very important, that if they have to implement their NDC target in true sense, their off-grid means that solar rooftop programs or any other decentralized renewable energy-based systems has to be in the fast track. In terms of the installed capacity, grid connected capacity would reach around 67 gigawatt by 2030 and 234 gig by 2050 under this LC scenario. And this is quite significantly high compared to the BAU, because when you are implementing, moving more towards renewable, your capacity has to be higher, because it's, utilization rate, CUF and the PLF is much lower than the fossil. So you need to install more. Now, the battery storage, we have separately, estimated, not in this model, but that we have not shown here because that was part of our investment plan, but not in this capacity program. Now, generation under LC scenario would increase by about 5 times and 16% higher than the BAU level by 2050. So that is because anyway, we are moving more towards the electrification. So the generation has to be higher. So this is the pathway for Pakistan from 2020 to 2050. These are the highlights by 5-year time step, that what needs to be. So we found that they need to continue investment in large nuclear power projects, because this is the story for all these regions here. Because when we are talking about cleaning of the grid, greening of the grid, and also achieving the low carbon, pathway, cost is always a factor, and renewable always comes out to be expensive when it comes along with the storage. Because when you have a massive scale of renewable penetration, when we are talking about more than 50% of the capacity in the system is going to be renewable, you can't think without the storage, or you can't think without the grid infrastructure upgradation. So if you put all these costs on top of it, in general, I'm not talking only about for Pakistan, but for in general, the cost goes up almost by 100%. Now, if that is the case, then it definitely those renewable energy become quite a kind of challenging situation for the countries to adopt, because the affordability of the power is in question. In that context, nuclear always, when we are doing this kind of least cost optimization, because these models are all on the overall, the supply cost is getting minimized. That is the objective function of this model. So it will always pick up that technology which will provide you the least levelized cost, LCOE, over the period of its operation. So definitely nuclear comes in, and it is definitely a good option to become a. Of course, there are some certain other factors into it, but this is here. We also found that coal-based power plants need to be there in the system for some time. It cannot just go. You cannot ask anyone to shut down immediately. But what we found that they can gradually go out of the coal. There should not be any effort to do the life extension of the coal projects. Whatever is there, it can continue. Similarly, we find that for 2030, the peaking of, we also found that the peaking of coal power plants are happening in around 2030s. And then the rail base, the complete electrification of rail network is quite an important measures for the country to decarbonize. Similarly, gas, hydro, and nuclear dominates in 2035 as well. Biomass-based power generation can also be investigated in the country, because that also shows up certain potential. Then electrifying passenger transport, which talks about the electric vehicle. And also we can talk about in 2040s, demand side transition towards cleaner fuel in industry, cooking, and transport. That could also be important, because this is just what we did, that from now until 2050, the entire trajectory, we tried to identify what are the key steps that needs to be taken by the country to achieve those targets by 2050. So cooking, we found that the cooking, because a lot of cases in the country, we found that cooking is still based on the biomass. So that is one of the most inefficient way of getting the cooking energy. So electrification of the cooking is also part of it. So if they can gradually move from biomass-based cooking or the gas-based cooking to electrified cooking, at least in the urban areas, that will also give them a huge benefit. And also we found by 2045, higher electrification of various end-use demands. That should be that priority, that as much electrification as possible for the country, that should be adopted. And demand side transition towards cleaner fuels continues. And finally, by 2050, renewable and clean energy transition across demand sectors, and by around, as mentioned, that around additional of almost $198 billion is required to achieve this target. So this is more or less the transition path that we found for Pakistan, which is aligned with their NDC targets. Of course, this is not necessarily leading more towards the net zero thing, because that time, as I told you, it was not. In fact, Pakistan do not have any net zero target as of now, if I'm not very wrong. So this is where we stand now. And in terms of the summary and conclusion for the country, role of energy efficiency plays, this is quite important for Pakistan. The energy efficiency will be an important area of their interventions. Electrification of power sector transitions, electrification and power sector transitions are important. Then role of coal in clean energy transition, which basically we found that the coal will be picking off around 2030 with 9.3 gigawatt of capacity. That is the highest that they can achieve, and after that they can start declining. Also, we found that the coal-derived syngas can also be used as to manufacture hydrogen, ammonia, steel, or fertilizer. So basically, there are certain discussion going on whether the existing coal can, instead of using it and burning it, if this can be gasified at the source itself, and if those gases can be used for other purposes. In fact, that can be used for hydrogen, ammonia, and even for fertilizer uses as well. So this is one technology that can be explored. Now, investments in power sector, we found that for the power sector, as I mentioned, $192 billion is required. So this is the breakup that the nuclear can take up around $30 billion. Solar can take around 25, 33 in the wind, and 90 in hydropower. So these are the breakup of $192 billion additional investment that is required. And also, we found that this is quite important in terms of the role of institutions. The government can promote low carbon investments by implementing policies to attract private sector funding, because these huge amount of funding, given current Pakistan's financial, economic, or political condition, it is very important that countries should have a partnership with the private sector to leverage the finance. So this is what about Pakistan. So the same thing we have done for Bangladesh. I quickly skip through this because the time is limited. So what we found for Bangladesh, the low carbon scenario that we have developed, which is aligned with the NDC, we found that final energy reduction is almost 4.5 million ton oil equivalent. And the major reduction is happening in the residential sector, especially from the cooking, because Bangladesh is still, because of their socioeconomic condition, their cooking energy is mostly depending on the biomass. So that itself can have a huge saving. But you can see the absolute number of, in terms of the energy unit is only 4.5 MTOE, so that is not much. But majority can be saved through the cooking sector and the residential. Similarly, for emissions, we found that majority emissions reduction can happen through the transport sector. Is it transport? Yeah. This is transport, right? 83%? Yes, I guess so. Supply, no? Okay, sorry. Yeah. Right. So this is another area, because the Bangladesh current, the supply mix is mostly on the coal-based supply, coal and gas-based supply. So in the low carbon scenario, we found that this reduction is possible through energy supply, cleaning of the energy supply sector, which is shifting from coal and gas-based to the renewable. So this is what we found in the low carbon scenario. Now, this is what the summary of finding. Investment, in terms of investment, Bangladesh needs around $223 billion for BAU if it continues. So additionally, they need around $102 billion to achieve their low carbon NDC target, which is closely around $3.4 billion per year. In terms of emissions, they can reduce around 38% of emissions by 2050, achieving this LC scenario. And about 82% of the total emissions reduction is coming from the supply side. So they do not have much scope in the demand side as of now. The remaining, apart from 82, basically around 17%. So the majority of that part, the remaining 17% in the demand sector, is mostly coming from the transport. So these are the two areas where the power supply, if they can greenify, and the transport sector, if they can electrify with the cleaner fuel, then this reduction is possible. So in terms of primary supply, we found around 45% reduction. Final energy, we see around 43% reduction. We also see about off-grid electricity demand has to grow around 12%, because these are the countries where a lot of solar irradiations are there. Solar potential is very high for Bangladesh as well. So the solar, and Bangladesh actually running one of the largest solar rooftop program in the world. So I think to take the leverage of that, we expect that around 12% off-grid system growth is required. Then capacity, like grid connected capacity, can reach up to 55 gigawatt by 2030 and 109 gigawatt by 2050. There are a lot of studies. Bangladesh has already come up with, the power department, they have come out with several projections, which ranges between 70 to 110. So we found that based on their current economic growth and the demand, so our study got into 100 and almost 109, 110 gigawatts. So we found that this is pretty much in line with what government projections are. A renewable would be around 64% and 63% of the installed capacity by 30 and 50. So because this percentage almost remains same because there is a lot of increase in the gas share in Bangladesh. Then generation would increase by over 5 times to 516 terawatt hour by 2050, which is almost 7% more than the BAU level. Similarly, the pathway for Bangladesh, as we mentioned, that the solar based, the low carbon pathway for the country should be more on the solar base because they have a good amount of solar irradiation, good amount of solar energy potential. So they need to continue for some time with the coal base. So we cannot, in fact, in no scenario we have done any forcing of, stopping or kind of removal of coal-based power plant. So we allow the model to, have a natural death of the technology, means that no life extension. So after because this is a vintage model, so it has a life expectation, like every technology had its lifespan. So after the lifespan, automatically technology goes out of the system. Gas remains one of the important, fuel, even in the LC scenario. So, and in terms of the demand side technologies, we found that electrification of the transport is very, very important for Bangladesh because currently the majority of the passenger transport is on diesel. So it has to be on, it has to shift from diesel to, or the diesel and petrol to gas or electricity. Cooking sector, decarbonization is one of the most low-hanging fruit that we found because they are mostly in the rural Bangladesh. Most of the people are still using biomass. So if there is a program that can be launched to replace those biomass with the gas, at least intermediate fuel, and to finally to electrification, that could be a least, very low-hanging technology shifting what we found for Bangladesh. In terms of industry, Bangladesh is one of the biggest exporter of the textile, as you know. So we found that the textile industries are also very inefficient in terms of the electricity use. So energy efficiency improvement is one of the lowest, low-hanging fruit in terms of the marginal cost, if you see. So it is also incorporated here that energy efficiency should be a priority program for the country so that they can take the leverage of, minimizing the cost of production. And finally, traditional, that is already there. And I think that's all for the Bangladesh. These are the most, whatever the important thing we have highlighted. So this is for Bangladesh, like renewables for power generation and power system planning to ensure the integration of variable. So it is important that Bangladesh should, the LC scenario projects that renewable energy share in electricity generation to increase to 26%. By just 2% currently. So it is a huge jump that is required. And also for that, they need to do a lot of investments in the grid infrastructure development because their national grids are quite old and not capable of handling this variability. So they need to work on that. Then additional gas-based capacity given price volatility of the fuel and overcapacity challenges. So Bangladesh needs to carefully deliberate on investments in additional gas-based capacity, which is also in the discussion. So under LC scenario, with increased focus on RE, natural gas requirements and the electricity generation would reduce by 10 to 18%. Anyway, so that is on the gas side. And in terms of the key demand side intervention, Bangladesh has model shift and electrification in transport sector, energy efficiency in the buildings, industrial energy efficiency, and decentralized use of renewable energy. So this is more or less what we found as a kind of low-hanging fruits and also the top technological. So we have a much detailed report. We just captured the key points here. Once that report will be published, you will know, because we have identified sector-wise what are the technologies and interventions that are required. So, so solar rooftop program is one important technology that Bangladesh should adopt. They are currently running the largest off-grid solar rooftop program in the world. Also, the policy integrating climate change consideration into national and sectoral policy, that is also important, and institutional and technical capacity building is also necessary for the country. And in terms of investments, we have already mentioned they need around almost $100 billion additional investments between now until 2050, so next 30 years, to reduce 38% of total emissions. Mostly the investment will go into the supply side. So out of that, the solar can take around $65 billion, biomass 19, and hydro around $11 billion. And demand side additional investment is around $6 billion expected in the transport industry, particularly targeting energy efficiency improvement measures. So that we found for Bangladesh to start with energy efficiency improvement in the demand sector is the key. So I will stop here. Thank you very much. And then you will listen one more thing on the city from Garima.
Yeah. Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So, okay. So I will just, in the interest of time and so that we have time for discussion, I will quickly go through the slides for cities. So the two cities that we covered in our project were, in this assessment, is Denpasar and Dhaka. Denpasar being a medium-sized city and Dhaka being a large-sized city. I think we have all covered the methodology, but regarding the background, now why city assessments are important. The reason being that major cities around the world account for about 78% of total energy consumption and over 60% of total GHG emissions. And therefore, these low carbon assessments help us to identify potential emission sources and strategies for mitigating the carbon emissions and associated costs. And these assessments also help us to build more resilient cities and also to enable them to improve their economic competitiveness by attracting low carbon investments and green jobs. And these low carbon assessments are also instrumental for guiding the cities towards more sustainable path. So the similar kind of exercise was carried out for cities, wherein this data collection was carried out based on the available data and available databases in the cities. And data validation was carried out by stakeholder discussion and city experts. And energy balance sheets were created, which were used to develop a reference energy system. And a city energy database was developed, which was fed into developing a model baseline scenario. And stakeholder consultations and experts' view were taken to assess the planned and potential sectoral or city level interventions, which were finally used to develop the NDC low carbon scenario. And this was finally validated by the stakeholders and experts. So these are some of the assumptions on key drivers, which is population and GDP, which govern the energy demand that goes into the model as an input. And these are the two scenario storylines, as also for the national pathway, which was the business as usual, which is based on the current and historic trends, and the low carbon scenario that assumes targeted interventions towards a low carbon pathway. So this is the first outcomes of Dhaka city assessment. So Dhaka city, we all know, is the capital city and with a population of about 10.2 million. And it accounts for a share of 35% of the national GDP. So it's a like economic hub of the country. And Bangladesh also updated its NDC targets in 2021. So in light of that, the city also has to follow the similar trends. And Dhaka is the choice for most of the population in Bangladesh for its education and health facilities, employment and livelihood opportunities. But there is a lot of unplanned urbanization, high traffic congestion, and air pollution. So these could be also addressed through low carbon pathway. These are some of the Dhaka city climate efforts and commitments. Some of them are guided from the national commitments, and some of them are also local interventions, like the Dhaka Transport Coordination Authority developed a 20-year strategic transport plan in 2005, which was revised to develop a more integrated transit system for Dhaka city. Now, these are the summary of energy outlook results. So Dhaka city under a BAU scenario would need to invest around 14.4 billion between 2020 and 2050, and additional investment of 28 billion, around 1 billion per USD per year, would be required to support the decarbonization efforts. With respect to the GHG emissions, under the low carbon scenario would result in 17% lower emissions under BAU scenario and 40% emissions were lower than the BAU in 2050. And most of the reduction is from the demand side, because it is at a city level, demand side plays a more important role. In the primary energy supply is expected to be 4.1 MTOE and 10 MTOE by 2050. And import dependency would be 88%, which reduces from about 99% under the BAU scenario. But we've been with the low carbon efforts, the import dependency for primary energy supply in the city reduces to 88%. And final energy demand would reach 8.8 MTOE by 2050 under the low carbon scenario, which is around a 9% reduction from BAU. Electricity would occupy a share of 87%, followed by oil at 8% by 2050. So off-grid electricity demand would need to grow at a CAGR of 20% between 2020 and 2050, vis-a-vis only 5% under the BAU scenario. Installed capacity in generation, grid-connected solar PV capacity would reach 5 megawatt by 2030 and 34 megawatt by 2050 under the low carbon scenario. In this scenario, we also see a very high uptake of off-grid solar PV capacity, which would be around 6.8 gigawatt by 2050. And total generation would reach around 11 or 12 terawatt hour by 2050, and the rest would be imported. So some of the major conclusions and recommendations for the Dhaka city. Firstly, Dhaka city definitely needs ramping up of off-grid PV capacity for power generation, and reduce the import dependency by installing off-grid solar capacity within city boundaries to reach around 6.8 gigawatt to reduce the share of imported electricity within the city from 99.6% to 88%. Although the installation of 7 gigawatt of distributed solar is a formidable task, but a host of fiscal policy and regulatory measures would be required to achieve this scale of transition. But this also will enhance the urban resilience and also will will create energy independence within the city. Then there's a need for a collaborative process. So a collaborative process for monitoring and evaluating progress in the low carbon pathways is needed. So this collaborative, for example, could comprise of energy companies, cities officials, local trade organizations, NGOs, power cell representatives, who could meet at regular intervals to enable and ensure transparency and real-time monitoring and evaluation and assessment of outcomes. Then comes innovative low carbon business models and the role of governments. So innovative business models such as a city level demand aggregation and bulk procurement strategy could be considered for boosting the uptake of low carbon technologies. And city administration could also provide support by ensuring better implementation of these schemes, and by for example, providing a vendor management system or information of vendors for procuring these low carbon technologies, or the kind of services associated with them, fast tracking the government approvals, promoting best practices, and developing demonstration projects. So these kind of, the government can play a role in these kind of activities. So the kind of the fuel shift now is critical to this transition. Around 99% of residential cooking demand would be met through electric cooking at the final energy level by 2050. More than 30% EV penetration happens in the road transport sector at the final energy level, and natural gas is used in the industry would be replaced by electricity to ensure the low carbon transition in the Dhaka city. Then renewable energy, under the low carbon pathway, about 20% of the total energy demand in residential buildings would need to be met by solar rooftop PV by 2050, and about 25% of the electricity demand in commercial buildings would be met by solar rooftop by 2050, and likewise 3% of total energy demand would be met by solar off grid. So this kind of transformation needs to take place in order for Dhaka to achieve this low carbon transition. And the investments we've already discussed, around 28 billion USD would be required between 2020 and 2050 compared to the BAU scenario. This is additional investment, and therefore it is important to identify initiatives or which can enable access to finance and various ways of mobilizing finance like MFIs for city level climate action at scale. So I'm just going straight away to the outcomes of Denpasar. Here also we see that Denpasar city would need to invest around 3.64 billion. It being a middle-sized city, it will require less investments between 2020 and 2050. Additional investments of around 595 million would be required to support the decarbonization efforts, and emissions would be around 2 and 18% lower under the BAU scenario. Lower compared to the BAU scenario by 2030 and 2050 respectively. About 93% of the total emission reduction is expected in the demand side. So again, demand side is playing a major role in the cities. Primary energy supply, primary energy is projected to be 0.64 million ton oil equivalent by 2030 and around 2 by 2050. And import dependency would still be significant, which is around 96.8% by 2050 under LC scenario. This is because the petroleum fuels which is used within the cities is produced elsewhere, and likewise a lot of the power used in the cities also produced elsewhere. So we cannot replace entirely the use of fossils, for example, for transport, but we can surely reduce the dependency for electricity generation, and we can also use biofuels, for example, or blended biofuels for transport sector to reduce import dependency in the cities. Final energy demand would reach around 2 MTOE by 2050, and oil demand will hold a share of around 51%, followed by electricity at 42%. These are the two major fuels used in cities. And off-grid electricity demand would grow at a compounded annual growth rate of 15% between 2020 and 2050. Now, grid-connected solar PV capacity, being a medium-sized city, the potential is less, and off-grid solar PV capacity will reach around 310 megawatt by 2050. And grid connected would reach 101. So in total, around 410 megawatt of electricity would be generated by solar within the city. And total generation would reach around 0.7 terawatt hour, and the rest would be imported. So some broad recommendations apart from those, I think some recommendations are common to both cities, but there are also some key opportunities in the Denpasar city are uptake of renewable energy and electrification of transport, industry, and cooking sector. And interventions in the transport and building sector require involvement from both national and local governments and the private sector. But the power sector interventions, such as scaling up solar PV, are mainly driven from the national policies. Then the role of renewables for power generation, ramping up off-grid power capacity, off-grid solar PV capacity for power generation is important, and this will also help to reduce import dependency of imported electricity. Then fuel shifts under the low carbon scenario. To be able to achieve this low carbon pathway, more than 25% of residential cooking requirements would need to be met by electric cooking stoves. And more than 15% of EV penetration would have to happen at the final energy level. Biofuel blending of more than 20% in the conventional petroleum supply for transport needs to happen by 2050. And more than 80% of cooling demand would need to be met by efficient chillers. Then some of the other renewable energy, for instance, about 10% of electricity demand in residential buildings, which includes demand for heating, ventilation, and AC, it needs to be met by solar rooftop PV. And 7% of total electricity demand in commercial buildings is met by solar rooftop. Then innovative business models, as we have already spoken about that. I think one more important point which is missing here is also in consumer participation and consumer awareness needs to also happen within the cities. They should be made aware about the initiatives, and also the governments could influence behavior of the consumers. For example, developing supporting charging infrastructure and fast charging terminals. Starting some financial incentives to electric vehicle owners, for example, waiving of the parking fees and municipal tax waivers, and promoting non-motorized transport would be essential.
Initially, that you do this, several hundred, 200 sensitivity analysis after even running the different scenarios, and then you provide your recommendation to the decision maker to formulate their strategy and policies. This is what it's all about. And in particularly, we are getting a lot of requests from the developing DMCs that they would like to really see that they would like to have the kind of, their master plan, energy master plan, or power plan, power expansion plan, in order to meet their NDC targets, or whether they can really do carbon neutrality or net zero targets. But of course, in order to do that, you will see that you saw that all the results that PwC was explaining, that in order to meet that NDC targets and carbon and net zero carbon, then it will require certain amount of the additional investment, and then you have a different supply mix. That's what the model is showing. So these two plus Bangladesh report, but actually there was Outlook first, and then there was a technology roadmap was done. So we merged that. So these all what we present here, this will be published from the ADB publication. It is in print. It is now with communication. And then we are in progress of the printing it. We went through all the review, circulate for the comment. We got endorsement from the government as well. So this is what we're going to publish it. But anyway, you have this all the PowerPoint. And then also the publication will, once we publish it, it will be on the ADB website link, so that you can download that. One other thing which Anindya was mentioning about that, the software is free, but the solver, you have to pay for that. In the IEA tool that we are going out, we are doing this integrated energy system planning together. It is embedded already, solver is embedded. And this is for the DMCs that, they are conducting the capacity building. And afterwards, they are not charging anything. This is the free of charge to the government of the member states. And then whoever attended this capacity building training, they are all registered in the system, in the UN, in the IAEA. And then whenever there is updates in the software or any type of that, it's not only message, but all the other things that there will be, the new link will be shared with those ones who participate, who did the capacity building at no cost. Okay? Anything else? Yes, please.
Hello. Just a quick question.
Sure.
In case of Bangladesh and Dhaka, I just wanted to know, when the model was designed, did we consider cross-border electricity trading with the neighboring countries?
This is included in the Bangladesh. This is we got the endorsement beginning of this year. Last year that we got, it was reviewed by the ministry. It was shared with the Ministry of Power, Ministry of Energy, and then they, based on that, they did it. And then also in Bangladesh, I was there also when they, JICA did a master plan. JICA did a master plan, and then they wanted to, so I was there and then also we present it also, and then we review through it. It's the same methodology that the JICA did, and then it's not much of that. It's
Maybe we can discuss bilaterally, but is it possible to mention some numbers? Which country, how much is going to be traded to Bangladesh?
Look, one thing about that, that is the import. We are taking that as the model message is the least cost option. Okay, even you set the price this year, then which is the import price is higher than what domestically generated, then it will not take it. Okay, and then this is the variable that how you put it in. Yeah.
So here in this model, what we did that the import is the integrate. It's only one because this is a single country model. So the import channel is only one. So we can't say how much is coming from which country. We know how much is coming inside. How much is coming? That is there. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, because we have to go out because there is other session happening.